Open your Bibles to the 6th chapter. As you know, we're studying the Sermon on the Mount. And tonight, on the eve of Thanksgiving, we're going to talk about fasting. So, tell you what, let me switch to I like to use the iPad, but it is just about dead. I forgot to charge it, so let me just rely on the Bible. Get situated here and we'll get started. Matthew, the 6th chapter. We're going to begin with verse 16. And I forgot to get the clicker. All right. So let's read now verse 16, verse 16 and 17. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. So let's talk about fasting for a moment. I have no luck with clickers. Did you do that or did I do it? All right, so probably another night we'll rely on the back. So under the law of Moses, we can see that there were regular fasts that were commanded, specifically the Day of Atonement. Let's turn over to Leviticus, the 16th chapter. Now, we probably won't see the word fasting itself here. I'm going to make a connection to another verse that I think will help us understand why it is accepted that this included fasting. Verse 29. Again, this is about the Day of Atonement. This shall be a statute forever for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict your souls and do no work at all, whether a native of your own country or a stranger who dwells among you. Let's turn over now to Isaiah, the 58th chapter. We're real familiar with the 53rd chapter, but this is 58. Hopefully we're familiar with 58 as well. '58 in verse 3. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls, and you take no notice? So, from what I understand, it is accepted that Day of Atonement, that would have been a regular fast. And there were other occasions in which they fasted. There were voluntary fasts. Anybody remember the subject of the story that's going on in Judges, the 20th chapter? What had happened in that prior chapter? Test your Bible chapter knowledge here. It involved the tribe of Benjamin and a Levite. Huh? Yeah. There was a Levite that had gone to stay, and he lodged in a home there. And the men of some wicked men of Gibeah, I believe it was Gibeah, came out and demanded the man to abuse him immorally. And he sent out his Levite instead. And of course, that nothing to say that was correct. It was not right. But they abused her and she died. What did he do with her? Cut her up in pieces and sent her out to the 12 tribes. How was that accepted or viewed? What did they think about that? Yeah, nothing had ever happened like this. And what happened to the tribe of Benjamin as a result? Yeah, I heard several different things. I didn't hear anybody real clearly, but yeah, they nearly wiped them out. They killed a number of men. And it's in that time after that, I believe, as they're reflecting upon that, they actually called a fast. 1 Samuel, the 7th chapter. Let's turn over and look at that. If you look back at chapter 6, remember the occasion that the Ark of the Covenant had been captured by the Philistines. God had allowed this to happen. And it stayed with the Philistines. What did the Philistines eventually do? They sent it back. God caused a lot of trouble for them because they had it. So they sent it back. And it wound up staying at the house of Abinadab, I believe it was, in Kiriath Jearim for a period of time. And if we look at verse 6, Samuel now is telling the people, they gathered together at Mizpah, drew water, and poured it out before the Lord, and they fasted that day and said, "We have sinned against the Lord." And Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. If you look back up a couple of verses before, look at verse 3. Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, "If you return to the Lord with all your hearts and put away your foreign gods and ashtoreths from among you, prepare your hearts for the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines." So they did that. They were obedient to that command. And part of their appeal to God here and their mourning for what they had done involved fasting. What about the book of Esther? What's the story there? Chapter 4 particularly. What was about to happen to the Jews? They're about to be wiped out. And who made an effort to get someone to intervene? Am I asking that question well enough? Who are the main two characters here? Say again? Mordecai and Haman, but who's the queen? Esther, yeah. And I think he even says to her, "You might have been born for this purpose," or "You might have been put in this position for this purpose," I should say. And what was her instructions to him? Say again? I die, but I think while she was doing that, she actually asked them to fast. I guess what I'm trying to show here is that there were certain occasions that were connected with fasting, right? Here's another example, the book of Jonah. Because Jonah was told to go to Nineveh. Did he do that initially? No, he didn't. But he eventually went. And how was the word of the Lord received by Nineveh? Received pretty well from the top down. Even the king, he proclaimed a fast. They appealed to God. This is an idea of appealing to God, mourning for something, in this case, mourning for what they had, appealing to God for forgiveness, for him to change his mind. Kind of see a pattern there. We're going to continue to see a little bit of a pattern. Next chart. So by the time of Jesus, for several different reasons, it appears that fasting had become really a regular practice among the Jews. Secular sources tell us that the Jews fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. Among the things that the rich young ruler said that he did, what did he say he did twice a week? He fasted twice a week. So we see some consistency from what it is claimed among secular sources with what his practice was. So, again, we're seeing sort of a pattern here. Now, that's a bit of a different type of thing than what we just read in those examples. These seem to be more ritualistic type of fast, right? Where they did this as a regular basis, took a couple of days a week. Let's go back now to our key passage that we just read and think about what Jesus has said with respect to fasting, what they were to do or not to do. when you fast, don't be like the hypocrites. They actually had, when they fasted, it seems they wanted everybody to know they fasted, right? They put on some sort of, a face. They did something, didn't put on a face, but they did something with their countenance in such a way that you could look at this person and say, boy, he's fasting today. It says the word disfigured. I don't think it actually means that they maimed themselves or did some sort of harm to themselves, but they put on a show of some sort that let everybody know they were fasting. And if you connect the next verse with what Jesus says to do, we can understand that probably they also I take it that a normal thing, if you got up for the day and got dressed, as if you're an ancient Jewish man or woman, I guess, there was a process by which you maybe have anointed your hair. Just like we do, we get dressed for the day. Those of you that have hair actually go and comb it in the mirror. That's not something I have to worry about much anymore. But they would have anointed themselves in some way, right? Jesus is saying, when you are fasting, anoint your head and wash your face. Don't let it be known that you're fasting. Don't make a show of this. What was the reward of those who went about to let everybody know they were fasting? What did they get out of this? Was God real pleased with that and gave them credit, I guess you might say? What did God say about that? What did they get out of it? What ultimate benefit did they get? Yeah, the praise of men or the admiration of men. You might have been one. You might not have heard anything, but if you're one, you're fasting, and everybody looks at that person. Wow, what a religious, pious, righteous person that is. They're fasting. That's totally the opposite of what we're seeing here in terms of what Jesus said ought to be associated with fasting. Next chart. I see a bit of a connection here from some of the examples that we have seen. I think the idea of mourning over something, an appeal to God for some reason. Let's look at some examples here in just a moment. But I see that connected with fasting. There's a connection there. I'm not saying it's absolutely exclusive. Maybe there are other occasions that warrant it. And I'm sure we're going to see a few. But there seems to be a connection between mourning and appealing to God, at least from what I can see. Turn over to Matthew, the 9th chapter. Verse 14. Feels like I'm cutting out. It's when I've been and it feels like it's cutting out. Well, actually, it cut out anyway. Then the disciples of John came to him. Disciples of John, what's our general view of them? Pretty favorable, right? They're pretty good folks. Disciples of John came to him saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast all? Do not fast. Let's look at Jesus' response. Jesus said to them, can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. Jesus suggests here that it was not appropriate for his disciples to fast. Who is he referring to when he says the bridegroom? Yeah, he was referring to himself. So it suggests that there might be occasions when a fast or participating in fasting is not appropriate. Let's look at some other references. And I'll tell you what I actually attempted to do. And I won't claim that I've got every one. And I want to make a distinction here. There were many occasions, or several occasions, in which there were fasts conducted by people named in the New Testament. Many of these were Jews. But I made a specific effort to look for Christians who were fasting. And we have some examples of that. Acts, the 13th chapter. Let's look at that. What's the occasion of Acts 13? First missionary journey. Paul and Barnabas are going to set out. And the church there at Antioch. And of course, Barnabas is mentioned. Let's look at... hold on here. Yeah, verse 2. They ministered to the Lord and fasted. The Holy Spirit said, "Now separate me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work which I have called them." Then, having fasted and prayed and laid hands on them, they sent them away. So again, this was a fairly significant event, was it not? They are going to be sent out and to go to all of these cities and all of these places in an effort to spread the gospel. Pretty big deal. So they actually fasted in association with that. I thought that was pretty significant. Turn over to probably a one page in your Bible to Acts 14. What's the occasion here? Still in the first journey, right? Aren't we? And verse 23. Why did they fast? Let's just read that. 2 pages in my Bible. When they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. So this occasion was the appointment of elders. They fasted. There is another reference, at least in some versions of the Bible. This is in 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter. Hopefully you can see the charts. King James and the New King James include fasting. Of course, the context here is a husband and wife relationship and the agreement on both parts to abstain from intimacy for a period of time. And what were they to devote themselves to? Fasting and prayer, at least according to the King James and New King James. I will say, and I've got an asterisk there, the reason I put that is that there are some versions of the Bible that are based on really older manuscripts, I believe, that do not include fasting there. So I wanted to point that out, just in case you don't see it like in the ESV or some of the more modern versions. They don't necessarily include fasting, but I thought that was still worthy of mentioning. So can we all agree that these are several examples of Christians fasting? I think we can, right? Next chart. I think if you put all this together, and any time we study a subject, and I'm not saying I did this tonight, but anytime we study a subject we're trying to learn more about, I think it's essential that we find all that we can about that particular topic or subject or event and put it all together and see what we can come up with. So I'm going to say this. I'm not sure all of you will agree with this, but I think I've read enough to say this. The teaching of Jesus, you know, if you read Jesus' comments about fasting, it is almost assuming that there will be occasions in the lives of a Christian that they will fast. That's the way I read that. But it does not seem like there are specified times in which it is required that it should be done. Because we don't see consistency. We don't see, there's not enough consistency of that being a part of specific events. I'm not saying that the right way, but while there are not specified times or specified events that require fasting, it sure seems to me that God seems to imply that there are times when maybe we should fast. There's a comment in the back.
I think what you're saying is there's no regulation of it.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way to put it. There's no regulation of fasting. That's a good way to put it. Now, I will say this, and I'll get right to you, Lorenzo. And something I noticed is that, of course, Jesus specifically is saying in this context, don't make a show of it, make it private. But we've just noticed some examples where collectively Christians did it, right? So I don't think that Jesus' comments to not make a show of it and make it private preclude people collectively deciding to do it. Does that make sense? Lorenzo? Yeah. I like the way you put that, and I'm probably not going to remember what you said, but, obviously eating is a physical need, right? We have to eat to live. But that's a physical need. We have a much greater spiritual need. That is our connection, our relationship with God, feasting on the Word that He gives us, right? That is to be what we're really all about. We're not to be about eating. But the biggest takeaway from this is that God will see this and reward us. You see, I have the word will highlighted there. I came to that conclusion. I first said should, or you might say might be a part of it. We might all be different there in how we view that. I don't know. I think it's a subject that's worthy of more study and worthy of more thought. We just experienced a very traumatic thing here at Eastside with the loss of Anna. And I got to thinking about that. Would it have been appropriate for us just to do that collectively and appeal to God as we mourn that? I'm not saying we should. I'm not trying to create a cause here or make everybody do it. I thought about it as I was studying this. Just put it that way. I'm going to move on to the next passage. Any final comments there? All right, let's keep moving. And this is another example of Lorenzo's arrangement of the class, I will note. In the syllabus that he created, I've got all the good ones. And he's laughing, and he knows I'm picking on him, and I know he didn't do that on purpose. But the next time we do, I'm going to get sick that night and call you about 6 o'clock and say, you're teaching. No, I'm just kidding with him. So let's go to verse 19 now. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. When we talked about fasting just a minute ago, what was the last thought that Jesus left us with at the very end? What will God do? Reward us. Reward us. Whose treasure, whose reward, whose prize are we trying to get? God's or the world's? What are the world's treasures? Admiration. And I think I've got a chart that'll talk about this here in a minute. Admiration, money, pleasure, that's the reward of the world. But instead, God is saying, seek after His treasure, His reward, eternally treasure. So I think there's really a continuation of the theme, even though it may seem totally different. Next chart. So earthly treasures, they're only temporary. What's the maximum amount of time you're going to get to enjoy your wealth? Up to what? Up to your death. Are you even guaranteed that? No. You're not even guaranteed that. No, he didn't. He lost. Job lost so much, but he remained faithful, right? We won't read it. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things of the earth. That's Colossians, the 1st chapter. Let's turn over to 1 Peter, the 4th chapter, and verse 4. Excuse me, I meant 1st chapter. Sorry. 1 Peter 1 and verse 4. Well, let's just read verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. And it goes on to say it's kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed. So again, that same idea here is that God's treasure, God's reward is eternal. It will not go away. It will not fade. Think about the rich man in Luke 12. What did he say? What happened with him? Have a kind of a bumper crop? Yeah, he had some great crops, so what did he do? Yeah, he built bigger barns, collected all of his crops, and what did he say to himself? Yeah, take it easy. What did he say prior to that? What made him think he was going to be able to take it easy? Yeah, he had much. Heard somebody say something over there. He gathered up a bunch of crops and he stored them. And it was time to take it easy. Yeah, I've got stuff laid up for many years. And what did God say to him? You fool. Tonight, your soul is going to be required of you. Then whose are these things going to be? You know, we spend a lot of time saving, planning for the future, which I've got a point there. That does not necessarily mean we can't do that or shouldn't do that in some ways. But if that's what our focus is, and building up a big bank account or a retirement fund, if that's our focus, and building up treasure, then we are putting it into something that is not going to last. It will not last. It cannot last. Freddie mentioned the market crash. Was that in the 1930s, 1930? Something like that. And a lot of people took their lives because they lost everything. I've heard it said that some of my relatives that lived back then were so poor they didn't know the difference. They kind of lived off the land and raised everything, and that's pretty much how they got by. But yeah, people who put their stock in all of this wealth, and when it was gone, they had nothing to fall back on, and a lot of them, life just wasn't worth living anymore. 1 Timothy 6. First Timothy 6, verse 17. And this is Paul writing to Timothy. Command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to give, ready to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. So there's a warning to rich, and there's other passages that we could go to. In fact, Even on the same page of my Bible, if you'll look back just a few verses, verse 9, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in perdition, in destruction and perdition. And then it goes on to say, love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And many have actually lost their faith over the love of money. And God warns us about that. Does he say you can't be a Christian if you're rich? No. In fact, he said, command those who are rich. Don't be haughty. Be ready to share. Store up that foundation. So, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be industrious and hardworking and plan for the future. It's not saying that we can't do that. In fact, I started to pull out some passages from the Proverbs, and there were so many, I didn't even pick any, but there are so many concepts in some of the wisdom literature in particular. Industriousness and hard work and storing up for the future is actually a good quality. But I think it is our attitude towards these things, right? We can have treasure, but it can't be what rules us. Next verse, next chart. And your comment is a good segue into the next verse, I think, because I think this is all connected. And Freddie just said, what is your goal? How do you obtain it? Has a lot to do with your attitude toward it. Verse 22 of Matthew 6, 22 and 23. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? I really think this is a continuation of the theme that we've just been talking about. Turn over to Proverbs, the 28th chapter. And I think you'll see a connection here. Proverbs 28, and we'll notice verse 22. And I will say there are variations in translations, right? There are some translations that word this a little differently. I'm reading from the New King James. This is verse 22. A man with an evil eye hastens after riches and does not consider that poverty will come upon him. Do you see the connection here between riches and evil eye? I thought that was significant in terms of what we're talking about. Turn back a few pages to chapter 23. And verse 4. Do not overwork to be rich, because of your own understanding cease. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. So you see, again, setting your eyes on something. In this case, riches. And I think that's kind of the idea here that's continued. Look at verse, let's go back to Matthew. And I should have held my place. I thought I did. Yeah, I did. Matthew, the 6th chapter. The eye is the lamp of the body. I think the eye here is used metaphorically. What are you looking for in life? What do you use to look physically? You use your eyes, right? But the idea of looking can be used metaphorically from a sense of, what am I seeking in life? What am I trying to obtain? I think that's the idea here. Now, there are other aspects to it that we could expand upon. What do you allow your eyes to see? That certainly would fit into this as well. Again, but that would be what you're looking for, right? If it's something that's inappropriate or something like that, or if it doesn't necessarily have to be anything vulgar, but it could be something you're looking for, like looking for treasure. If your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If you're only looking for worldly things, and you're seeking to attain those things, then you're full of darkness. If your eye is healthy, what are you seeking? Light, okay. And we see a contrast between dark and light. Thinking of what we just talked about between earthly and heavenly treasures. If your eyes are healthy, if you're looking for a heavenly treasure, right? Your eyes are looking for that. Your eyes are healthy. If you're looking for if your eyes are unhealthy, what might you be looking for? Again, particularly given the context that we've been talking about tonight. Evil things, okay, that's definitely very part of it. Riches. If you're seeking riches and seeking earthly treasures, if you're seeking the praise of men, think about what we first started talking about with respect to the fasting. What were they seeking? Praise of men. That's what they were looking for. Again, I think the eye here, to me, it is sort of a metaphorical type of viewpoint. Verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and Mammon. Again, we're continuing this theme of good versus evil, treasures of earth versus treasures of men. The word here for Mammon is an Aramaic word, and in this context it's almost personified because God is a person, right? And we're seeking to serve God, or we can seek to serve Mammon, which is wealth, and it's personified as if it is a master that we follow. God expects us to serve Him in entirety, does He not? This is like a marriage relationship. When you're married, you are completely and totally devoted to that person you're married to. And there's no place for anybody else. And I think there's a parallel there to God. We are, in a sense, married to God. And there's to be no place for anybody else. I'm going to stop. We've covered the verses that we were going to look at. Richard, you got a comment?
I thought of this when you began with the topic of fasting. It took me a minute to find the passage in Matthew 23:23. Jesus is scolding the scribes and Pharisees, but he said they neglected the weightier matters. And that's been the thread of this entire class, those things that are more important.
Yeah, Richard, for those of you who didn't hear, he cites Matthew 23:23, and that's the discussion where they were being very careful about tithing all these little herbs. They were giving a tenth to God, which they were supposed to do because Jesus said, these you ought to have done and not to do what? Left the other undone. But we're talking about weightier matters, are we not? And that's his point. Putting our focus on God, letting our treasure be in heaven, serving God instead of Mammon.
That's what God wanted from the get-go with all of his children. In fact, the children of Israel, he wanted to be their God and they be his people.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think sometimes people view that God in the Old Testament is somehow different than he was in the New. The law was different, but he expected them to be completely devoted to him just like he does today, us today. He expected that. He required that. They're my people, I will be their God. He expected them to have that close relationship. We don't have time. Maybe we'll do this Sunday. But they'd be thinking about this. You're an ancient Israelite living during this time. How did you perceive what righteousness is? What examples did you have to understand righteousness and what it meant to be righteous? Who did you look for? Think about that. And what kind of things did you get from those people that you saw? I want to draw a contrast between what Jesus is teaching versus what they learned from those people that they saw. And it was a radical difference. Radical difference. It was sort of a me first approach versus a everybody else first and God first. Anyway, thank you for your comments.
We find ourselves quite often thinking about pondering that of a lack of leadership. We find ourselves sometimes at work and there's someone who will not stand up, take the march, take it forward, and lead. Maybe other areas of our lives we find ourselves just kind of longing for that person that will lead us. But as a Christian, we've never had a lack of leadership. A few days ago, Cheryl shared an article with me that talked about the 10 top characteristics of a good leader. Discussed how a lot of those things where Christ was the epitome of those, and I will not go for a long time and talk about all 10 of those. But there was a few things that stuck out with me. One, without honesty and integrity, a leader, one, will not be very well respected, but will not be successful. Honesty and integrity is a key component of a good leader. Think of Christ. Christ never once took the easy way out. Christ never once told a small lie in order to get a better message out or to make his cause look better to the public. He never rephrased any statements. He never took the facts and shown them in a different direction. He spoke the truth. He led us to do the same, speak the truth. He spoke it in love. And he's told us to do the same, to speak it in love. And he did it even when there was grave consequences. We're told a good leader will go to bat for his team. Did Christ go to bat for us? One, did he go out and set the example of what we should do? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But what did Christ do for his team? What did he do for his apostles? How did he teach them? How did he build them up? What's he done for you? He laid down his life. He suffered and he sacrificed so that we could accomplish great things, so that we could have a hope of heaven. He teaches and he builds others up. And did Jesus not devote his life to teaching those around him? You know, Paul says to Timothy, go and teach these things to men who will go out and teach other men, and then they can teach other men, and they can teach other men, and you see that pattern continue to flow. That started with Christ teaching these things to his apostles, who would then go out and teach others. So not only was Christ a leader, one who would teach and build others around him up, he was one that gave those that he led the charge to go on and to take it forward. And we could even spend quite a bit of a time, how did he handle those situations like the woman caught in adultery? Right? The times where he was trying to be cornered, the times that he was trying to be tricked into saying something, and yet he used those to turn them into very much into a teachable moment. How do you think they felt when he said, you without sin, cast the first stone? Or Peter, as he was teaching him, and he says, let me come to you on the water. And he said, come. Peter came. Did he cast him away when he lost his faith? No. He saved him. And even Peter, after he rose from the dead, what a lesson Jesus taught him about getting up and going again. After Peter had denied him 3 times, Jesus asked him, do you love me 3 times? And after each of those, he said, feed my sheep. Go forward. Take it forward. Commitment and passion. Sometimes we have a hard time setting our minds to doing something, to accomplishing the task, especially when it gets hard. But what has our leader done? Is there any sin that would be harder for us to overcome than it was for Christ to face the cross? Our leader has set before us such a pattern of perseverance, commitment. He finished the course. Even with the nights before he was going to finish that course, praying to the Father, and sweat drops as blood flowing from his head. Fervently praying, yet he did it without failure. He did it without sin. That's the perseverance that he has shown us, and he has told us to have. In the last few moments, he inspired others. You know, we say a good leader will have someone ready to walk through a brick wall for them. You know, often in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 35, we think about the statement that Peter said to him, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And yes, we know Peter shortly thereafter failed and denied him. But one of the things that I don't think I've noticed as often is, after Peter said that, the scripture said, "And so said all the disciples." Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the disciples. That's one who had inspired his disciples. And yes, they failed, but they were well inspired. This is the gospel that inspired those in Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 2, and then in Acts chapter 4, when there was people in distress and there was people hurting. Those who believed were with one heart. And neither did anyone say that any of his possessions was his own, but all that he had was in common. And they would go out and they'd sell their possessions and share them there with one another. Yes, Jesus inspired his apostles, and then he inspired the Christians to go out and to do great things. He has inspired us to go out and do great things. And what about accountability? Christ, was he accountable? All things I do by my Father's authority. With all that he did, he held himself accountable to the Father's authority. And I can't help but think of John chapter 12 and verse 47 through 49 for us as we think back to the same type of accountability and thinking back to our focus of Sunday. "And if anyone hears my words and does not believe, I do not judge him. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. He who rejects me and does not receive my words has that which will judge him. The words I have spoken will judge him the last day. For I have not spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me gave me a command of what I should say and what I should speak." That's the ultimate accountability. The good thing is, it's not going to be a shock. It's not going to be a surprise. It may to some. But to anyone who's picked their Bible up and read very many pages, it's not going to be a shock, and it's not going to be a surprise when we stand before the creator of this world and we're asked to give an account and we're judged according to the words that he was given us. We may be shocked, but we shouldn't be shocked by the fact that's the standard that we will be held accountable to. And lastly, a good leader is going to delegate and empower. Well, Christ definitely delegated to his apostles when he said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel. Go teach, go baptize. Go into the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believes and is baptized will be saved." He definitely delegated when he said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no man than this, to lay down his life for his friend." Yes, he has delegated to us a most important task to take this gospel message and take it forth to the world. It's also delegated to us an important task that we love one another. And that really hard phrase at the end, "as Christ loved us." He also empowered us. He's empowered us to go to heaven. So tonight, through what he did, you can be saved. Through what he did, I can be saved. But again, it is by following our great leader and doing what he has done, doing what he has commanded of us to do, obeying the gospel, and then living our lives to the fullness and to the measure and trying to live up to the standards that our leader has done for us. And if we will do that, what a great nation, what a great body, what a great family we would be. Do you need to commit tonight? Have you been thinking about it and going, that's too hard? Well, Christ did much harder than anything you can do, even if it means giving up family, even if it means giving up friends, or even habits that's been there all along. It won't take more perseverance than what it took Christ. If there's anything we can do for any of you to help you follow the leader, please come as we stand and as we sing.